Hi, my name's Kelly Boss, and I'm a social worker in mental health at the Couchiching Family Health Team. I want to talk to you today about self-compassion. So you've probably heard the terms self and compassion and kind of have a bit of a brief idea of what it's about. But I want to tell you a little bit more on how it's a very useful practice for our mental health and wellness. A lot of the information comes from the work of Dr. Kristen Neff, who has studied self-compassion and found it to be a very useful practice in our overall sense of well-being, and also helps us move through problems. So let me explain. There really has three tenets of self-compassion. The first tenet is kindness over self-judgment. And often we can be pretty judgy with ourselves. I usually open when I'm doing this workshop live with the question, if you were to get a call from a friend and they said, hey, you know that dream job that I've been prepping for and I really wanted, I didn't get it. And what might you say to them? And I usually have people say things like, I tell them, oh my goodness, like you would be ideal at it. I'm so sorry. A better thing will come along. You know what? They probably internally hired, something like that. That's the kind of thing we often say to our friends or family. And then I usually turn it around and say, what would you say to yourself? And usually the room has a bit of a awkward, funny, smirky pause where people realize that they would be a lot less kind to themselves. And in that case, we might say, oh, I should have done this or should have done that. I should have come earlier. I shouldn't have worn that. Why didn't I read the health and safety rules? So that's generally how we would approach it when it's ourselves. Usually that something's wrong with us. And so you wonder why that is. And I think it's often because we think it works. We think if I'm just hard enough on myself, I'll get the job next time. Or if I'm too easy on myself, then I will just not follow any of the exercise practices I want. Like I really need to beat myself up on. And we have that as a learned behavior, either through maybe how we were raised, or maybe a coach or a teacher was really hard on us and we kind of internalize that. So the self-kindness is actually better for us because it can help us kind of get alongside ourselves and encourage us. And if you think about parenting, it's quite similar. You could browbeat your child into having straight A's. But how are their relationships going to be like? How is their self-esteem, right? How are they going to feel about themselves? And, you know, so much better to come alongside them and say, hey, bud, I know you want to do better. How can I help you? And that's almost like what we're saying to ourselves. Like, how can, you know, let's just be kind to ourselves. You know, let's do better next time. It's okay. So that's really useful to just be kind to ourselves. Because I don't know about you, but if I've been really hard on myself, then I just feel like watching Netflix and eating chips all weekend. Like it doesn't really spur me on to be my best self. The second tenet is calming humanity over social isolation. So we can often feel in a moment that we're the only ones experiencing it, that we're the only ones suffering. And the truth is people suffer all the time. This is something we can all relate to, is that we all have moments of suffering. So, you know, we forgot to hand in the expense report. We feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the only one that screwed that up. We lose our keys. We feel like I'm the only one. And the truth is people around the world are losing their keys and not remembering to do things at work, or having difficult relationships, or people around the world struggle with their relationship with their mother. This is common, and we can all, like, we don't have to feel like we're the only ones. And we don't need to isolate in that as I'm broken or there's something wrong with me. The third tenet is mindfulness over identifying with a problem. So you don't need to get stuck in there. You don't need to be that problem, but you need to mindfully acknowledge your feelings. You need to feel your feelings. So sometimes when we skip this step, we'll say, oh yeah, okay, so that was really hard. Oh, well, suck it up. And if a friend called you, I just wonder how long this friendship would last, but if a friend called you and said, I'm really having a hard time, you wouldn't say, okay, well, get over it. You'd probably say, I'm so sorry, or that's really hard. And that's what we need to say to ourselves. We need to acknowledge our feelings so that when things happen, we can acknowledge them. I mean, often we look to others to give us some compassion, and that can be disappointing at times. People may not get your perspective. People may be dealing with their own stuff, and they're not able to lend that compassion. And so then we are often left feeling a bit sad. But this is the great thing about self-compassion. It's always available to us. So when we're going through a hard thing, we need to be compassionate to ourselves and mindfully acknowledge that this thing is hard. Not rate whether we should or shouldn't feel that feeling. We can acknowledge our feelings, and it's okay to have our feelings. I mean, if you can imagine, maybe you feel jealous because your neighbor got a new car. That's not something you're going to call your best friend and say, oh, I'm super jealous, because we might think that that's kind of ugly of us to feel that way. So instead, we can show it to ourselves and say like, oh, that's a tough feeling. Jealousy is hard, but I'm just going to acknowledge this feeling. And this is how we move through a compassionate response. We go the reverse order. We start with mindfully acknowledging, this is hard. It's hard to lose my keys. It's hard that I'm having a difficult time in my marriage right now. Whatever it is. Then we move to the common humanity part where we say, okay, well, I'm not the only one that struggles with their teenager. I'm not the only one that fears losing their job. We acknowledge what's going on for us. And then lastly, we say something kind to ourselves. So sometimes it might be, hey, I'm a good person. Sometimes it might be, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. My intentions were good. Sometimes it might be that, I can learn from this and grow. Because sometimes the situation, we do wish it went differently. We do feel we made a mistake and we want to learn from that. So then we want to say something we believe in. You can't say everything's okay about not handing my expense report if you don't feel that way, but you can say I can do something different next time. So I hope this helps. This is the self-compassion workshop, a couple tips to using it, and I think it can be really helpful for us, and it's always available to us. Thanks for watching.